Well, good morning. Yeah, here I am coming to you from the deck of my condo. And if you're lucky, you'll hear some of the bird songs that I'm hearing. And it's a beautiful day, so let us begin. The title of my talk is Peace in the Eye of the Storm. So many people have said to me and to others, how do I do practice without getting hooked? Hooked by all of that's going on in the world. You know, the COVID, the political scene, the fires, the hurricanes, whatever. And so I'm going to respond to that. So the response is, number one, we're going to get hooked. I mean, we're human and we live in a time that's very captivating, and hopefully we're all paying attention to it. But I think it can be helpful to, number one, find that, first of all, what we get on the news is not a cross-section of reality. Okay, what we get on the news is basically what's wrong and what's sensational. And in a way, that's okay, because that was the original purpose of the news. You know, the news was like the town crier that told you the enemy was coming, or all is well, or whatever. But we wanted to make sure that we were safe. And that's why the news was created, so that we know what's going on around us. However, that's become now entertainment. It's become 24/7. It's become multi-channeled and very, very niched and segmented. So we're definitely not getting an accurate view of reality. And also the brain doesn't perceive reality. The human brain doesn't see things as they are. Again, the brain developed and evolved as a survival mechanism. So the brain sees what it needs to survive. We see what we need to survive, as it were. So what happens then is that the ego got developed in a part of our development, both personally and collectively. The ego became an operating system that helped us to survive. We came up with an identity. This is who I am. I'm smart, or I'm dumb, or I'm good, or I'm bad, I'm pretty, I'm ugly, whatever, self-identifications we have, and they are multiple. Those were developed as a means to survive in our family and in the world that we lived in at the time we were growing up. So the world as we see it, and the world as we perceive it, both personally and collectively on the news media, is not reality. So that's important to know that if we pay much attention, we see that reality is really much more positive and optimistic than what the news or even our brains would tend to tell us. And yet, perhaps a Buddhist might say the problem is not with the news, the problem is not with what's going on in the world, the problem's not with that we're not doing it right. The problem is simply that we are identified with a false sense of self. We are identified with the body, we are identified with the ego, and our whole purpose of living from that perspective is to survive. The problem is that doesn't work very well. It doesn't make us very happy. It helps us to survive, perhaps, but it doesn't help us to be happy. What we really want is not to be found in the world. And yet the ego tells us that's exactly where we need to go to get what we want and to be happy. And so the ego creates a strategy of if only I have this, if only I could do that, if only things were different, then I'd be happy. And if you've lived long enough, as many of us have, we look back and we see there was always an if only. There was always, if it weren't for, or someday when this issue is resolved. So I'm not dismissing or diminishing the gravity of the times that we live in. They're very, very crucial times. And yet I want to say that no matter what happens externally, if we're identified with the ego, there's always going to be some problem somewhere. I can guarantee that. So seeing that, we say to ourselves, there's a better way to do it. And whether or not it's through a crisis in our life or whether we evolve into it, but we come to a place where we say, I want to live intentionally. I don't want to be driven by the operating system created by my family 40, 50, 60 years ago. I want to live intentionally according to some higher purpose, some higher intention. And so we take on a program, whether it's a 12-step program that has the 12 principles, 12 steps as the intentional living pattern diagram. Or in our case, we take on the 3 refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, which is the statement to Buddhists that this is where we go for refuge. We don't go to the ego. We don't go to the world. We go to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, ultimately all of which is within us. The Buddhists sometimes call these the 3 jewels. So, first of all, we acknowledge that there's a power greater than ourself, greater than the ego, the refuges, the Dharma, the Buddha, whatever you want to name it. But we dedicate our practice to that. Our practice is about taking refuge in something higher than ourselves. And so part of our practice is awareness. A big part of our practice is awareness of how and why we get lost. The way to overcome delusion is to become aware and to wake up, to see reality as it is. So in order to do that, we have to be aware of our mental states, because the mental states form the lens through which we tend to see the world. A big part of our practice is observing the mind, the mental states, our thoughts, and also the attitude and the emotions and that which colors our perceptions. So if we're in fear, we're going to be in a mental state of seeing danger everywhere. If we're grieving, we tend to see loss, and become aware of losses. If we're angry, we'll see things that are always pissing us off in one way or another. So the mind states form the filter through which we see what we consider to be reality. And again, it's important to remind ourselves that it is not. So, coming back to what happens when we get hooked. So I'd like to give you just a little principle here you can work with, and that is to come back to noticing what is it that hooked you. Somebody said something, or somebody did something, or somebody didn't do something. But there's something that hooked you. And in that getting hooked, there's a belief, there's a story. It shouldn't be this way is usually a big part of the story. He shouldn't have said that, he shouldn't have done that. He's wrong, I'm wrong, you're wrong. Something's wrong, something's broken, something's bad, somebody's bad, etc., etc. So that's really the story that gets created, and that's the belief that gets reinforced through that story. So the keystone to the whole process is really to let go of the story, at least momentarily. That's what I tell myself and tell others. You can have your story back, but let's take a time out. Let's take the attention off the story and put it internally into our own mind state. Becoming aware of the mind states that are driving us, the mind state of fear, the mind state of anger, the mind state of revenge, or whatever it might be. Or it might even be a happy mind state, looking for something good, something pleasurable. So looking at all of what's going on within without judgment. There again, that's the other key place. Drop the story, look within without judgment. And just look at and bring compassion to each one of these mind states. This is what's present. There's no should or shouldn't be. It's simply, this is what's here. And I can bring compassion to it rather than bringing judgment to it. And as I do that, these mind states will begin to dissolve. They'll begin to gradually become less and less gripping and onerous. There's a story that I've told many times about the prophet Milarepa, who came home one time. He lived by himself in a hermitage, and he came home to a small home, and he found 7 demons inside his home. And so, to shorten the story, he was able to get rid of all but the worst demon by negotiating or by commanding them to leave. And much of the time we can get rid of some of our demons by simply saying, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to choose to focus on something else. But there are those demons that are really big, and no matter what we decide we're going to do, it seems like they're going to have their way. Sometimes we come to the point where it's like, okay, I'm powerless. I can't do anything about this. And we surrender totally, not to this story, but to this internal energy that seems to be overpowering and overwhelming us. And as the story of Milarepa goes, he got to the point where he actually put his head in the demon's mouth and said, okay, if you need to eat me, and if I need to be destroyed, if I need to be annihilated, so be it. I will bring compassion, and I will accept you as having a right to be present right now. And when that happened, the demon disappeared. And that's typically the way it works, not necessarily immediately. But when we're willing to look at and be present to anything with compassion and without judgment, if it's not true, if it's an illusion, it will disappear. If it is true, if it is real, we'll know that, and it will get bigger, and it will become part of our life. So one of the statements that I find very helpful to remind myself with, particularly when something feels very overwhelming, is that only by being willing to be annihilated do I discover that within me that can never be annihilated. Only by being willing to be annihilated do I discover that which can never be annihilated. So we discover that place within us that's totally fearless, that's totally without judgment, that's totally accepting of things as they are. And from this place, then, we can choose what to do in the world. And as we do that, that becomes very powerful, because we're operating not from the ego operating system, but from the operating system of the higher power, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and all that goes with that. So be kind to yourself. See what hooks you. Drop the story temporarily, if necessary. If you can do it permanently, that's great, but even if it's just for 5 minutes, do it for 5 minutes. Look within rather than without. What mind states are arising? look at them with compassion. Be fearless. Or if there is fear, that's okay too. But don't give in to the fear. Be present. Be willing to put your head in the mouth of the demon. And as you do that, you will discover that within you. And that's really who you really are. That's what you really are. This basic goodness, this basic power, the Buddha nature, whatever we call it. That's what you really are. And that's what will come forth. And that's what will find peace in the eye of the storm. And it will also tell you exactly what you need to do in each moment in the midst of that storm. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's to take action. But whatever that is, you stay centered. Taking a deep breath, feeling that indestructible place within you. And I salute and I honor your journey, and I honor who and what you really are. Namaste.